Karen Nazarian, who's a global anti-Semitism expert, Alan Solo, another anti-Semitism expert, Amy Spitano, who's JDCA CEO, and Amanda Tyler, who's a Christian national expert. It should be really interesting. And immediately following that, we're having a JDCA reception with members of the Counselors and Families Forum. You don't want to miss it. So please visit jewishmembers.org/DNC to sign up for everything. And without further ado, I'd like now to invite JDCA board member and committee chair, Izzy Klein. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our program, Path to Victory, How We Ensure Democrats Win. Whether this is your first Jewish Dems event or you're a longtime supporter, welcome. We're glad to have you. I'm Izzy Klein. I serve as JDCA's political committee chair, and I've been so since the beginning, back in 2017, 2018. We are all here because we're excited to elect Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. What will it take to get that done? Today we're joined by the expert political operatives in a conversation that's going to be moderated by Halie Soifer to discuss, shed light on what kinds of messages and actions and strategies it's going to take in order to take back the House, keep and expand our majority in the Senate, and elect Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States. As the political home and voice of Jewish voters, advocating for policies and supporting Democrats who share our values, JDCA has been mobilizing Jewish voters to make a critical difference in the past 3 election cycles. With your help, we are ready to do it again in 2024. I'll now turn things over to our fellow board member, Dee Feinberg.
Thank you, Izzy. As you said, I am Dee Feinberg, and I'm also on the board where I serve as secretary and vice chair of development. Today's panel will be moderated by Halie Soifer, who has served as our CEO since its inception in 2018. Prior to this role, Halie served for nearly 2 decades as a national security advisor to 4 members of Congress, including then Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Chris Coons as a senior policy advisor in the Obama administration. Jim Gerstein is America's leading expert on Jewish voting patterns and a founding member of GBAO, a public opinion research and political strategy organization dedicated to making a difference. Jim has worked as a pollster for various candidates and independent campaigns in the U.S. Senate, House, and local elections. Simon Rosenberg has spent 3 decades in national media and politics, including 2 on presidential campaigns. He founded the New Democrat Network, where he advised leading politicians, administration officials, and policymakers on a wide range of issues. Throughout the 2022 midterm elections, Simon bolstered his reputation as a Democratic strategist by continuously remaining one of the few optimistic voices about Democrats' chance of winning, despite the so-called red wave. And he was right. Yeah. And he now leads the very famous Opium Chronicles community. I have to tell us how to sign up. And so, Halie, let's get started.
Great. Thank you, Dee Dee. Thanks, Izzy. Thanks to everyone for being here, especially those for whom it is day 2. We look forward to seeing you throughout the whole week. And for those watching online, thank you for being here as well. So we'll get right to it. It has been 4 weeks and 2 days but who's counting? Exactly. Since President Biden decided he was not running and turned things over to Vice President Harris, how has this fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of this election? And with 78 days to go, what can Vice President Harris do to maintain this change in terms of the momentum that we have seen? Jim, we will start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks to Halie and the awesome people at JDCA for everything you're doing, and for being such a, it is such an important time and playing such an important role, and participating in this awesome convention. So, and it is an awesome convention in large part because of 4 weeks and 2 days. We went from a situation personally in which I would get polls back every single day of the 500 polls we're doing this year, and really dreading opening up the email to see the results each day. And now I get polls back each morning, and I can't wait to open up my email to see how we are doing. So the trajectory has, it's night and day. This was a country that did not want a Biden-Trump rematch, and it became very clear and into focus over the spring and early summer. And Joe Biden did a big thing and passed the torch, as we saw last night. I think the strategic imperatives at this point, we've had a good few weeks of press and media and momentum following what was a very difficult several weeks of media and press and bad momentum. Starting with the debate, the Republican convention, the hero worship that we saw there and all the coverage. But I think we are on a great trajectory right now. There is a ton of work to do. We kind of went from being down pretty decisively in battleground states and nationally to being quite competitive. Some polls you'll see were even, some were ahead. It varies by state to state. Different states are catching up at different paces based on the kind of the demographics in the state. But I think the strategic priorities right now are for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to continue introducing themselves to the American public, and in some case, for Vice President Harris to reintroduce herself to the American public, because people want to learn more about her and hear more from her. And as part of that, I think it's demonstrating a fluency on the economy and on tough issues like immigration, things where Republicans are going to be really hitting her hard. And eventually, I would like to see her pass that threshold of credibility on those issues, so that we have an election where abortion rights are front and center for people, and that is what they're going in the choice that they're making between these two candidates, among other differences between them. But that, to me, those are the big strategic priorities for what needs to happen right now.
Halie, good to see you again. Nice to see everybody. This is a joyous week. I'm sort of reminded today, in 2008, I was invited to speak at the Herzliya conference, and I sat next to Bibi. He was out of power at that time. And during my talk, he was there to talk about American politics, and I think it was January of 2008, right? And I said, because everyone was either with, if they were a Democrat, they were with Hillary, and people were worried about Obama. And I said in that room, hey, this guy, Barack Obama, could win the primary and become the president. And I got booed, right, when I said that, because it was so unimaginable for everybody in that room. And then look what happens, right? It was the miraculous Obama candidacy and presidency. Listen, we're in this extraordinary moment. I mean, if you look back at this time, I think there are 4 things that have contributed to this energy and intensity that we have. Number 1 is that Trump made a huge error in picking JD Vance. I think that any hope that he would have gotten momentum out of that convention, I think, was limited or attenuated because of this offensive, this odious character that he picked, who I think immediately started re-radicalizing many Democrats, because it was an affirmation that of all the directions that Trump could choose, he chose the most radical and extreme direction. And there was an immediate response. And obviously the campaign vetted Vance. They warned Trump that all this video that's been coming out in this audio. And Trump, in another moment of idiocy and his diminishment, chose Vance instead of all the other options that he had. Number two was that Joe Biden then did this incredibly selfless, historic thing a few weeks ago that is still kind of emotional. We saw it last night. You know, I call him an American Cincinnatus. He was so selfless in what he did. And I think we're still living in some ways with the emotional part of that that's creating some of the intensity around this. Third, and probably most importantly, is that Kamala Harris came out of the box just roaring and strong and confident and amazing. And she's just single-handedly taking control of this election in many ways. And as one commentator said the other day, the reason that Trump is freaking out so much and mad truthing so often and doing all the things that he's doing is that for the first time in 9 years, the story of American politics is not about him. And yeah. And it's very likely that it won't be ever again after this, right? But then fourth, importantly, is that the vice president in her first major act picked an amazing partner for her. I will be honest with you, that morning I was a little nervous because I didn't really, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I didn't really know Governor Walz very well. And putting somebody who was untested, she having to do this extraordinarily complicated thing that she was having to do, and picking somebody who was not nationally well known, who we were going to have to spend money and time defining before they defined him, right? All the things. But it's obviously been a brilliant pick. And I think that for me, the core of the brilliance is that she's picked a partner who can go to parts of America that may have been difficult for her to reach. And she's now saying to people in rural areas and ex-urban areas that you're part of my team too. I mean, you may not feel it, but I want you to be part of my campaign. You're going to be front and center when I'm president of the United States, because I picked a guy from small town America, from rural America, to not just because who's going to be sharing, the White House with me. And it was a sign of respect to folks that had been difficult for us to reach as Democrats. And so there was, I think, incredible brilliance in what she did. And so we're here now because I think those four things have contributed to this moment of opportunity, of promise, of possibilities, as Joe Biden calls it, of joy. And, we just have to, now that I think we have a slight advantage, I mean, we can quibble about a point or two here, but I think we have, a better candidates, better arguments, far better, superior organization. We have momentum. The Trump team looks flummoxed and confused. And now that we have a slight advantage is the time when we have to do more, right? When you're winning is when you have to pour it on. And in order to, we're now playing to win. We're not just playing to catch up. And I think what we'll be discussing in this discussion is how do we do that? But certainly I think that it is okay. I'm giving everyone permission in this room to operate from a place of joy and confidence and not a place of fear and worry, because I think that going all the way back to 2021, we've been operating from a place of fear and worry as Democrats. And we can be fearful and worried, but I don't think it should be the primary form of our motivation in these closing months, and nor certainly it wasn't last night. I mean, last night was amazing. This is my 9th convention, and I'm not sure that I've ever seen anything like what we saw last night before. So this is a happy time. We're on offense. We're playing to win. And I think together we're going to talk now about how we're going to kick their ass in November.
Okay, we're not quite into that. We'll get there. We'll get there. Jim, in addition to many other things, is a wonderful pollster. And Jim, one of the things that you taught me early on is, because we all do this, is to look at the research, not the me search. Okay, so the me search is the person sitting next to you who says, oh, my friend told me this, or my friend told me that. That's called me search. Okay, so Jim, tell us what the research says in terms of the hard numbers, the polling. What are you seeing in terms of the presidential, the Senate, and the House? Because to be clear, we're not just seeking to win the White House. We want to hold the majority in the Senate, and we want to win back the House. What do we got in terms of the research?
First of all, I love hearing me search quoted back. That is awesome. So, I mean, the research, I think we're seeing a lot of things that everybody in this room who opens up clicks on NewYorkTimes.com every morning or whatever website you're looking at is saying, and that is the big comeback that is the big dynamic driving Kamala Harris's comeback from where Biden was is starts with Democrats and Democratic constituencies such as young voters, Black voters, and Hispanic voters, and where President Biden was underperforming where he was relative to 2020, and that was a big gap. That's one of the reasons that you saw in the research that Democrats down ballot were outperforming President Biden, whether it was all the way from Montana to Arizona to Ohio to Nevada. You would see all these Senate races that are going to determine the balance of the Senate. You were seeing the down ballot outperforming. Similarly, in the House races, what has happened now is that they're closer to parity. The down ballot is still outperforming because we've got outstanding candidates in for both in the Senate and in the House. But these senators in these tough states are fabulous, and the Senate candidates in these tough states, like Alyssa Slotkin or Ruben Gallego, are fabulous. And so they are they're outperforming, but it's the gap is narrowing because Kamala Harris has injected so much energy and reassurance to these voters where Biden was underperforming. So I think the House, it is trench warfare. We do a lot of polling in the House battleground, and it is really close. It is a toss-up. There are redistricting things that worked against us, a couple things that worked for us, but the net is a slight, harder than what we would want. But again, we've got some great candidates, and I think there's going to be a lot of close races. I share Simon's position of we should be operating from a position of confidence and joy and doing the hard work, because these are close races. And that's where we're at right now.
Okay. I'm going to quote you too, Simon. So Simon, as was said in his introduction, was one of the first people to say there will be no red wave. And this was before Dobbs, before the decision to overturn Roe, which fundamentally transformed the last election. So we're taking a cue from the vice president. We are feeling good. We're feeling joyful, but we have high anxiety. We're Jews. And we also suffered the collective memory of 2016.
Yep.
So Simon, you seem to know something in 2022 that nobody else did early on. And so tell us, going into 2024, are we justified in feeling confident? How are you feeling? And both about the presidential, the Senate, and the House.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened in 2022 was that I wrote a piece in October of 2021 saying I felt this was going to be an unusual midterm election because the Republicans did something that parties don't usually do, which is their politics MAGA had failed in 2018 and 2020. And when a politics fails, parties usually run away from that politics. They were doubling down on that politics. It was a strategic error in my view. And I wrote a piece saying, I think there were three things that were going to make the midterm elections close. One is that if we had if we could communicate to the anti-MAGA majority that had just voted against MAGA in 2018 and 2020, that these were the same guys that you just voted against, that it was going to create a lower ceiling for them. Second is that Joe Biden had been good president and we were going to have a lot to run on, which I still believe is true. And third is that we have an unprecedented set of tools that we haven't had before to use a political term, to mitigate midterm drop-off, which is the first, it's terrible English, but what it meant was to make it less likely that we would have that normal drop-off in midterms, because we can, using texting and phone calling and postcarding and millions of Americans who are fighting really hard for their democracy, that we have the ability to mitigate the kind of normal midterm drop-off. And that's really what happened in the election, in my view. And I think that what ended up being that catalyst of reminding the anti-MAGA majority was a combination of Dobbs, Uvalde, the January 6th committee hearings, and also just an unbelievable slew of terrible candidates and extreme candidates the Republicans fielded all over the country. In many ways, those same conditions exist now, right? Joe Biden was a good president. Country's far better off today. We have these unprecedented tools to drive our performance in state after state to the upper end of what's possible. They've continued to field really horrible extreme candidates, including their president and vice presidential picks, right? And also the, like Moreno in Ohio, right? Wherever you look, they've got one of them, they called it the bad candidate problem. We're now calling it the Republican candidate problem, right? Where the extremism of there is still this thing that's driving our politics. And so I agree with Jim. I mean, I think that we're slightly favored now in the presidential race, in part because I think our ability to close is going to be far stronger than theirs because of our money, because of our volunteers, because we're going to have an unprecedented grassroots army, deployed to win the election. Second is and also because their party continues to be torn and not unified. And the opposition to Trump inside the Republican Party, which will be on display tomorrow night, I think is when the Republicans will be speaking tomorrow night, is unprecedented. And it matters. It's a couple points in an election. 2-3 points is the whole thing, right? And then in the Senate, as Jim mentioned, our numbers are very strong. I mean, they've been remarkably strong. I mean, even when Biden was in bad shape, we had 5, 6, 7 point leads in many of these Senate races around the country, at least in public polling, right? And Ohio is holding. I think, Montana is the big unknown in many ways. I think it's close. I just talked to JB Hirsch, who runs the Senate Majority PAC, and he said Tester's holding, in that race, and we should be optimistic there. And in the House, I think what's happened, and what was always going to be a close competitive, and you've got House members coming later today, who I'm sure will have fresh intel and things to celebrate. All of our candidates have gotten much stronger in recent weeks because not only has there been an influx in money and volunteers at the presidential level, it's happened in every race too. I've spoken now to 6 House candidates in the most competitive races that we have to win. All of them said they've had an explosion of volunteers and money, meaning that they themselves are more muscular and stronger than they were a month ago. And so I just think on balance, right, when you ask, what do I see this time? I think I would much rather be us than them in every way imaginable, right? That one can, think that. But also, I think this issue of momentum when we're so close to the end, remember, early in-person voting starts in 30 days. 30 days, people are going to start voting in person in this presidential election in 3 states. And then it's going to come really fast. And so I think we're going to come out of this convention with incredible momentum. We saw it last night. We felt it. And I think, what do they got, right? I mean, Trump gets up every day. He tries to make news. It's just more negative noise. He's an embarrassment. And he doesn't have the ability any longer to fundamentally change the trajectory of this election. It doesn't mean, as Jim said earlier, that the trajectory of the election can't be changed. It can be. We saw that in 2016. I don't think Trump has the ability to do it anymore. I think in many ways, he feels like a spent force. And yeah, they're going to spend a lot of money roughing her up. They've already anticipated where the attacks are coming from. I just want to say one last thing. I think the other thing I was sort of getting at what I was saying earlier. We also have to just take a step back and just recognize how miraculous and exceptional the performance of the Biden-Harris-Walz campaign has been. They haven't made any mistakes. They are operating in the most, I was involved in running 2 presidential elections. The degree of difficulty of what they've had to pull off in the last 6 weeks has been unbelievable. And every day it feels like it's getting better, right? They keep inventing new words and new language and new ways to connect, right? The visuals of this campaign are incredible. We all have to, when the DNC people, cheers to the DNC, to the staff running, the campaign, because what they're doing right now, the campaign they're inventing in front of our eyes is powerful and new. And I think part of the dynamic is that we get up every day and this is a new thing. It's a drama. We want to find out what's happening today. Where's Kamala going today, right? Where's the plane? Because it's this new dynamic thing. How do they compete with that? I think it's going to be really hard.
Okay, so we're going to transition now to talking about the Jewish vote, because despite the fact that things are looking great, of course, there are these stories. Every election cycle, we see it. And they're generated by Republicans, let's face it, who are trying to make inroads with Jewish voters. Every time they try and every time they fail miserably. But let's talk about as it relates to this election. Jim, what are you seeing in terms of the Jewish vote in 2024? What can we expect in terms of the issues that are driving Jewish voters in this election? And how are we looking at it in terms of, because of course we're not a monolith, younger Jewish voters specifically versus older Jewish voters?
So I think that one thing that we've seen in the Jewish vote is a very stable Jewish vote. This is not a constituency that is still thinking about their political beliefs and values and trying to decide what they want in this country and what they want in this leadership. And at the core of that is it is a very democratic, liberal constituency that shares the fundamental political beliefs and values of the Democratic Party, whether it is on economic issues and healthcare or cultural issues like abortion rights and LGBTQ rights and the whole range, climate change, the whole range of things that are the challenges facing this country. Jews are extraordinarily well aligned with the Democratic Party. At the same time, they also can't stand the Republicans and have I would describe it as a hostile attitude towards the Republicans. And that isn't going to change, even if there's going to be a CNN interview on the street and Chairman Ron Klein's old district of someone saying, Kamala Harris hates Israel, just like Barack Obama hated Israel, right? I mean, this is it. Every 4 years, you get this. I remember we had a Muslim Kenyan terrorist apparently running for president who was going to lose the Jewish vote. Actually, ended up getting in the 70s, just like 70% of the Jewish vote, just like most Democratic candidates get. And so there's nothing that is going on in the Republican Party, starting with Trump and MAGA, but also the McConnells and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, any identifiable Republican, including the party itself, has a very negative perception among Jewish voters. Anywhere from 75 to 80% unfavorable ratings. These are, astronomically bad ratings, and nothing's going to change as long as they continue being who they are and Jewish people continue being who they are. The third piece is it's always about, Israel. It's going to make Israel is an issue that is Jewish voters are, they're very emotionally attached to Israel. And anyone who's sat on a JDCA conference call before has heard me say it, but I'll have to repeat it. Even though people are very emotionally attached to Israel, it is not the thing that they are primarily voting on. A candidate needs to pass a threshold of credibility on the issue of being sufficiently supportive of Israel. It is actually an easy bar to pass, an easy threshold to pass, because most candidates do have a somewhat of a warm affinity towards Israel. And also Jewish voters are very liberal and have no problem. 90%, according to our research, say it is okay to be critical of Israeli government policy and still be pro-Israel. Those things are not inconsistent. And so that's you take all of that together, and Kamala Harris, just like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton before, everybody has passed that threshold quite easily, and Kamala Harris will as well. So I think that is a very stable vote, strongly principled, and there is in the post-October 7th environment, people have become more attached to Israel. It's not changing, but that's not impacting their vote. They are concerned about anti-Semitism. We do see that as a rising issue, but they also look at the two parties and believe that Democrats are fighting anti-Semitism more than Republicans. It doesn't help the Republicans that Donald Trump thinks that Doug Emhoff is a crappy Jew, and that if you vote for, if you are a Jew who votes for Democrats, that you hate your religion. Those things tend to be insulting to Jewish people and don't endear him or their party to them. So we can talk more about young Jews later, or if you want to keep going. Okay, so Simon, it's great to see Simon.
Yeah,
By the way, Simon is awesome. We've
we're old
worked
buddies.
together for many years, baseball dads, and highly, love working with Simon. So young people who are Jewish, young Jewish voters are very interesting, and in that with everything that's going on, they have they are the ones who, unlike the older generation, they're less concerned with anti-Semitism. And I remember presenting to a JDCA board at some point where the younger Jewish voters were much less concerned about anti-Semitism on campuses. And then the older generations, and somebody, and you can raise your hand if it was you, said, how can that be? Don't they know that they're on college campus and there's anti-Semitism? And I said, I think we parents of college students are a little more worried about our college students than they are worried about themselves. But they also, it's their lived experience. This is a very diverse generation. Whether the young Americans are very diverse. They have experiences with people from different backgrounds in ways that others, older generations don't. And as a result, they have a different understanding of things. They also didn't grow up, the Israel that has been in front of them as they've been growing up is not the Israel of the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. It is the Israel of Bibi Netanyahu. And they have a big problem with it. In Israel with occupation of the Palestinians. And it is a big, it shapes their perceptions in ways, not that they don't like Israel, they support Israel, but they also, like actually all Jews, or not all, most Jews, can have two thoughts in their head at once, which is, I feel horrible about what happened on October 7th. I know, we know family, we have this, everyone's affected, the hostages, it's heart-wrenching. At the same time, people can still say, I don't like what's going on, and how, and Palestinian suffering is very upsetting as well, and the things. So I think the young Jews were more critical of Israeli policy and conduct of the war, and even more critical of Biden's handling of the war, thinking it was too supportive of Israel, was not impacting their vote. They were still the ones voting the most for Biden. And I look forward to when we have our next poll that'll look at how Kamala Harris is doing, but I suspect it's going to be quite promising and good for all of us. So we'll come back. I look forward to that conference call too.
Okay, well, Simon, here at the convention, there are obviously a few people out on the streets, just a few, far fewer than they said, but they're protesting. And we don't really see their views represented inside the convention hall, certainly not on the stage, but there are 37 uncommitted delegates, and they represent communities that, at least in the primaries in Michigan and Minnesota, largely Arab and or Muslim communities that were critical of the president's policy with regard to Gaza. Where do you think they will be now, the Arab American and Muslim American vote, which is obviously critical to Democrats, frankly, it has been. They've been important partners. And as it relates to Donald Trump's policy, you keep in mind the first thing he did was institute a Muslim ban. I just don't understand how they can possibly support him, including a non-vote, which is tell all your friends to vote for Trump. So tell us a bit about that community and that.
You had a better question.
Yeah.
Isn't Jim great, by the way? I mean, I always learned so much from him. And I was a Little League coach for 8 years. And I think it was my favorite time in Washington and all my kids are now gone. When I return back.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
What you're saying is so important in the mic.
Okay. When I return home after the convention, I'm going to be an empty nester for the first time. And so with my wife and and we're really excited. I hope my kids don't mind. Look, I think we need to learn. I think we have to keep our understanding of the uncommitted movement. I mean, there are several different strands here, right? One of them is just people in every election who, Obama in Michigan, there were 11% of the primary, when he ran for re-election, 11% of Michigan, the vote in Michigan was uncommitted. It was 13 this time. There's always going to be in an uncontested election, there's going to be a grumpy part of the family who wish they had other choices or may be angry at the incumbent for other reasons, right? It may not have had anything to do with Israel and Gaza. It could have been about his environmental policy or his policy on guns or that he was old. I mean, we don't have a lot of data to know that 13%, the idea, I mean, statistically, the idea that more than half of that group was voting on Israel and Gaza is probably a leap, right? In terms of just all the other things that you could express your discontent with the incumbent when it was a free shot, right? There wasn't data, there wasn't polling done of the uncommitted vote. And remember, the uncommitted vote only happened in a handful of places. I mean, this was not a really major kind of rebellion against Joe Biden. I do think that we have work to do. I think the way I view this is that this is a problem to be managed, but not a crisis. In every campaign, in every coalition, you have things that happen that you've got to manage and that become difficult and challenging. And I think like anything, if you don't manage it, it can become a real problem. I think the Biden world and now the Harris world are trying. I have a very close friend here at the convention. I'm not going to say his name, but he's spending all of his time with the uncommitted delegates, working with them, trying to engage them in the convention and making sure that they understand they're valued and we want them on our team, and expending energy on this. I think the final thing is I do think that we need better data and on the Arab and Muslim vote in America. I mean, so everybody knows in Michigan, because there was a lot of numbers being thrown around in the primary. In Michigan, Biden probably got about 90,000 Muslim / Arab votes. And again, as all of you know, I mean, you can be Arab and be Christian. I mean, some of this stuff is all kind of conflated, but there are about 9 of the 5.2 million people who voted in Michigan in 2020. Biden got about 90,000 Arab / Muslim votes. You were seeing numbers thrown around of 200,000, 300,000. That was population, right? That wasn't actual voters. And so I do think as we go forward, one of the things that is incumbent upon all of us is to get a better understanding about this community, to understand more, and to do what I think the campaign is doing right now, which is to invest time and energy in trying to ensure that they stay engaged, that they know that we want them to be part of our coalition, that we're not going to accept this kind of adversarial place, and that the truth is, there's no one who's worked harder for a ceasefire than Joe Biden. And it's just that he hasn't had willing partners. There's no one who's worked harder for a two-state solution than Joe Biden. He just hasn't had willing partners. And so we have a far stronger case to make, I think, to the uncommitted community than, frankly, we've often made, because it's been so contentious and difficult. But I also want to say that early indications are that universities are taking very seriously the process. I think many of them got caught by surprise. And I think universities, the UCal system yesterday just made significant recommendations about keeping campuses peaceful and where people can go and walk unaccosted, and that parts of the campus aren't shut down for them. I mean, these common sense things that I think will make campus life so much better for so many people in the fall. I think the universities are being smart and much more forward leaning than they were in the spring. How's that?
Great, okay. So my final question, we will now get to the ass-kicking part of the program. What do we need to do in order to win? And I will say this because JDCA is doing many things. Thank you for everyone who is joining us. We have phone banking, we have text banking, we are getting out the vote 24/6. We take the Sabbath off, but we are getting out the vote. And we are also working hard to ensure that the truth is out there. There's a lot of disinformation. What we have seen in the Jewish community is obviously the Republicans can't speak about the issues. So we see an unprecedented effort to distort the truth. And frankly, even to attack our community. I'm glad you mentioned, Jim, that Donald Trump has been disparaging the vast majority of us, millions of Americans, Jewish Americans, on an almost daily basis. 2 days ago, he said we should all get our heads examined. Imagine if anyone else had said this. It's anti-Semitic, right? Let's call it like it is. He's been saying it since 2019 when he said we were all disloyal or uninformed. Yes, he called the second gentleman a crappy Jew, but he's calling all of us crappy Jews. And you know what? It's anti-Semitic. So we're calling it like it is. We urge you to join us. But anyway, what should we do to ensure that we win in 78 days?
That was nice, Halie. Are you speaking tonight at the convention?
I'm free.
Okay. So in a close election, everything matters. And we are headed to a close election, and the Jewish vote, everyone says, will the Jewish vote be decisive? Every vote's going to be decisive that's out there, and it's all important. And I would say, I used to like to say the only problem that Barack Obama had with Jewish voters was there weren't more of them. And I think the same will apply for Kamala Harris. The only problem that she has is that there aren't more Jewish voters. But so what can JDCA be doing? You can be turning out people from our community to vote. And because for every Jewish voter that turns out, there's a 70% chance that that person's voting for Kamala Harris. And and for every non-Orthodox Jewish person that votes, you're closer to 80% chance of that person voting for Kamala Harris. So I think also, though, it's a turnout operation. There's also the activism that you bring and our volunteering in campaigns and sharing that energy and hard work to get the targeted vote out, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish. There's plenty of key constituencies that we try and turn out to vote on election day. Simon referenced the amazing operation that the Harris campaign has, and I think the more that JDCA can do to contribute to the operation, the better, because you have a lot of skill and talent in this room and online, and even those who are not tuning into this critical discussion, that everything matters in a close election. And there are several states that are going to be very, very close and are going to determine the outcome of this election. So please keep it up. Keep letting Halie write her op-eds and getting her voice out there, which is a uniquely credible voice in this moment as well, having served with Kamala Harris and leading this organization. I think JDCA has a lot to offer and impact in this election.
I think just building on what was just said is that it's incumbent upon this community to be very loud in the last few months of the election, because there's so much noise. I mean, I think I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. It is important that we are operating from a sense of confidence and offense and not defense. I think that what's happened with rising anti-Semitism, with Trump's bullying and outrageous language, with the right wingers and community who scream and yell and are much louder often than just the rank and file Democratic Jews, is that there's a sense of intimidation, right? And fear that is, and worry and defense. And I think my advice to everyone here is to end this election on offense and contesting spaces in your communities, and to also talk amongst yourselves about the necessity of taking responsibility for the sentiment that you put out into the world. And what I mean by that is I get people sending me stuff all the time that are these kind of emails that everybody gets, right, from right-wing people about these crazy things that of course could not be true. But you send them to 10 of your friends and say, did you see this, right? When you know before you hit send that the chance of this being true is like very remote, right? Don't do it, right? Take responsibility for putting good sentiment and positive sentiment and stories about us out into the world, and not doing their work for them, right? And becoming part of their disinformation machine. This is something that is really important, I think, because I think we do much more of this than we all understand. Hey, did you see this, right? Well, instead say, hey, did you see Kamala's great remarks yesterday? Don't do the negative, do the positive. And I think this is a really important kind of rewiring of the way that we have to close this election, because I think now we're in a place where when you're joyous and happy and winning, it's more attractive than losing and being angry and worried and frustrated and, and these other emotions that we all have, right? I'm not saying don't be worried about Donald Trump. We all have to be deeply worried, but I think there's also a way in the information war that we have to become smarter and recognize that all too often we end up doing their work for them in our own communities. And this is something we have to a habit we have to unlearn in essence, right? But I also think it means that when you get one of those emails that you know is just outrageous and silly and crazy, you have to like get on your friend a little bit about like, hey, you shouldn't be sharing this stuff unless you know it's true, right? Or if you know, if you can rebut it, fight it, right? Don't let this stuff sit. We've got to be more aggressive in contesting the information space. We concede the space too much, I think, to loud, obnoxious, bigoted, anti-Semitic voices of all kinds, right? And I think that we should be loud and proud. And yeah, and we're not going to be where we want to be in November if we're playing defense. I have an old rule of politics, right? Is that if you're not on offense, you're losing. And we need to be on offense here in the close. Finally, I think that, we have to do all the traditional stuff that we do. And I think that particularly with young people, right? One of the things I know you've invested a lot in youth organizing and so on. We need to talk to young people. It's really important given the noise, the craziness. I'm going to have a kid at USC and GW this fall, two of the campuses that went totally bonkers in the spring, right? And they need to hear from us. We need to be engaging young people. We need to be letting them know that we love them and we care about them and they're on our radar screen and we're not going to let them alone, right? Because I do think that for some young people, this environment is sort of like, you got to be kidding me, right? That I'm in this kind of crazy place I'm in. And I think that the work you've funded with young Jews is really super important. And whatever you can do in the close here, it really matters. And then finally, we just have to work harder than we've ever worked in anything we've ever done in our entire lives, right? The stakes on this could not be higher. We all understand what would happen if Trump were to win. The bigotry and xenophobia and anti-Semitism and illiberalism and pro-Putinism and extremism and all the isms, right, would win, and America and democracy and our freedoms would lose. This really is the most important election of our lifetime. I know we all joke that we say that every 4 years, but you know what? This clearly is. And so we just have to come out of this convention committed to whatever you thought you were going to donate, do more. However, phone calls you were going to make more of them, sign up for more shifts. Whatever you're going to do in canvassing and grassroots activity, schedule more time, right? We need to do more now, not less, because the opportunity for us is not just to win this election, but it's to crush MAGA and to start the process of putting this outrageous ideology into the dustbin of history where it belongs, because we're not going back, right? We're going forward. And I think this is a critical time for us to do everything we can to take this inspired leader now that we have, who's doing such an amazing job, who's lifting people up and creating more intensity and joy. And, look at what happened last night. The convention was wild, right? We got to be her partner now in going to win this thing and putting MAGA to bed for all time. It's within our grasp. Let's just go fight together and make it happen and go kick their ass.
Thank you. Okay. So I would say in terms of being proud and loud as Jews, tonight we're going to hear from a second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who has joined us a few times before, and his message always is to live proudly and openly as a Jew. And we're so proud of him as the first Jewish second gentleman. The only thing better is the first Jewish first gentleman, which he will soon be. And we're going to see him put a mezuzah on that White House. So we look forward to hearing him tonight. We look forward to all of you coming back. If you didn't get enough of Israel today or yesterday, we have a 10 o'clock panel tomorrow.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock panel tomorrow on Israel. We'll keep going the next 2 days. Please join us. And over to Ada Horwich, our development committee chair and board member from LA to Close. Here at 10 a.m. Yes. It is hosted by the DNC, but it's going to be here.
There's not much more for me to say, except what I wanted to start with was thank you to the panelists so much. We really appreciate all your input, your enthusiasm, and your ideas for where we go from here. And of course, we thank Haley for doing a wonderful job as a facilitator and more. The one thing I want to say is I want to thank everybody in the room also for taking the time to be with us today and join us in the next few days for our other events and panels. And I think you're going to find that interesting and helpful when you go back to your communities. But I'm the development chair with Dee Dee. So I have to say, you were talking about getting out the young people, the young vote, and that we have people doing that. But we actually have a program called the Fellows Program. And we have hired fellows. I think there may be positions for a few more in the battleground states, in universities and communities to get out the young vote and to speak for Democrats. So that is one way to really support us, to put money into the Fellows Program. And that would be at, am I allowed to say that?
We can support, you can support
To
JDCA.
support JDCA. And so thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in the next days.
Thank you.